5 keys to making that transition successful. And so let's get right into that specific topic, and I'll chat a little bit about the assessment here in just a minute. But there's 5 keys that we will be discussing throughout today. And that first one is individualization. How do we individualize the work for the staff that we are serving? So what is it that they specifically need, and how can we best serve them? That assessment is going to have some keys in there, so we'll chat about that as well. How do we communicate with staff in a way that engages them, in a way that keeps them involved in what's going on, but also that they can be incredibly productive during this time? And also those personal communications. How do we ensure we're really keeping strong relationships? The third is team dynamics, ensuring, hey, those team projects we have going on don't just stop because we're working virtually, or we might have half of our staff working virtually and half of our staff working in a location because we are an essential employer at this point in time. So we're going to discuss what that specifically looks like. Leads us right into engagement. How do we engage our team meaningfully? And then finally, accountability. What does that accountability look like? So I don't know about any of you, but there's been a lot of chatter lately about the Tiger King, right? And so we know that there's 2 distinct personality styles with the Tiger King. We have our cat lady, and then we have our Tiger King himself. So one of the things that we look at when we're looking at, working virtually and remotely is, hey, how do we also keep some fun in this so that we can keep those strong relationships, some of that banter going? But how do we know for which individuals are going to think that this is funny and others that are going to think this is not funny at all, right? So those are some of the kind of the key things that we look at. So a question for you, how many, and you can just put this in the chat box, how many of you have watched Tiger King or think that this is funny at this point in time? You can just put that in the chat box for us, and that will be fantastic. And I'm struggling with Zoom here. Okay.
So we have a couple people saying hilarious, funny. Then there's other ones that I haven't watched, don't know what you're talking about. So again, you kind of have that middle ground where some people think that this is great and other people don't even know what this TV show is.
Awesome. So question for you, Emily, do we have the poll questions?
We do.
Okay. I don't see them, and I don't know if they're in order. So anyways, we'll keep moving. So Tiger King it's a show on Netflix, and it's one of those kind of the memes have been coming through quite a bit lately. And so it's one of those that it's kind of a fun show to get away. Essentially, it's talking about real people that seem like they are so not real people. So that's what Tiger King is. So if you haven't heard about Tiger King, you can check that out. So let's get back to our regularly scheduled program here. And with that, this individualization, how do we individualize specifically for the members of our team? And so when we look at that specifically for the team, how do we know that? And so what if you knew the needs of each team member backed by science? And so often we're guessing at what our team members specifically need. And with that, so let's just talk through a couple different items. So under what conditions do your employees perform best? And so for many of us, we don't really know when our employees perform best, and a lot of times we're guessing at that, right? So, hey, does an employee perform best when they are under pressure, or do they perform best when they have a really quiet space where they can work for quite some time? Just give me 1 second. So where they can kind of work and share for some time. So when we think about this, so for example, we have some employees that, again, they need to really be sitting back in their corner. They need to know exactly what is needed for them to do kind of that checklist one after another, right? Another individual might perform best under pressure. So, they may be one of those individuals that when there's a deadline, they perform their best work right before that specific deadline. And so those are some of the things that we look at with individualization. So it's looking at this and saying, hey, we have the old platinum rule. How many of you have heard of the platinum rule? If so, just say yes in that chat box. All right, I'm not seeing anything. Yes, we're getting some. So yes and no, I'm hearing. So what the platinum rule is the platinum rule is essentially treat others the way you want to be treated. When I was growing up, it was always, the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. The platinum rule is treat others the way they want to be treated. Thank you so much, Jackie, for correcting me, right? So the golden rule, treat others the way they want to be treated, and the platinum rule is golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. Platinum, treat others the way they want to be treated. What we really want to look at here is when we manage others the way they want and need to be managed, we're going to get so much more out of their performance, and they're going to love their job so much more. And the way that many of us have managed or led has been based on how we've been taught to manage or lead and how we need to be managed or led. So that's a key distinction there. And so with that, when we look at this, especially from leading virtually, we're in a completely different environment. I know Emily and I were kind of joking beforehand about, hey, how is working virtually going? It's like, well, you know what? 3 weeks ago it said, make sure I get up every morning and take a shower and change and wear jeans, right? So, what do those specific things look like when we're working virtually? And it could be very different based on the scenarios that are happening at home for individuals. So another one is, what are key concerns about workflow in the work from home environment? So if you want to just post those in the chat box, what are some of those key concerns that you specifically have? And so we have some concerns that come from, hey, kids are at home right now. So not only are we managing, working from home, but we're also all of a sudden, homeschools. We're all of a sudden teachers of kids at different grade levels, right? We're also working in a different environment that isn't necessarily the environment that we've seen before. So we're going to post a poll question right now while those questions still come in. So the poll question we're going to post is, have you led a virtual team prior to March 13th of 2020? All right, so have you led that virtual team prior to March 13th of 2020? So we try to pick, when did this coronavirus work at home environment really start? And this will just really help us get a good idea of kind of who's on the call today. So we'll give you a couple more seconds to answer that. And while you're answering that, here's some other items that came in. Is there's no time clock? Yeah, that's definitely can be a hard issue. No home office, spouses also working from home. So for many of us, we have a situation where we are, sharing space that we've never had to share space before. So here's the poll results that just came in. And we have about 26% of you have led a virtual team in the past, and the majority of you, 74%, have not. So, how we do this becomes really important so we can, really get the most out of our team and have our team get the most out of this experience as we adapt and change. Thanks so much, Emily. So again, those key concerns to workflow from work at home environment, one of those is adaptability. And not every staff member that you're supervising or working with is going to be able to adapt in the same way, right? So some of those key questions that I like to ask is, hey, what needs do your staff have? What specifically do they need when working at home? And so I'm hearing some things about, how can I manage results? How can I effectively manage a project, Barbara? Those are fantastic questions. And we're going to talk about those when we talk about accountability, and we have some great tools for you there. Keeping tabs on projects, that's a huge one as well. And different individuals are going to need that differently based on how they specifically work in their own personal behavioral needs. Miranda, I love what you said here about casual conversations that we have when we're in the office together that helps us stay connected. And then also those issues that come up that we can just sometimes handle by sitting in a break room or kind of walking through, the office, popping in someone's office that doesn't necessarily happen from home. So how do we create that in our specific environment? So there's a couple things that we're going to talk about as we go through the presentation today. The next question that we have is to create an individualized approach that allows each person to thrive in this new and currently uncertain environment. So we'll get there in just one second, but one of the things I heard many of you say is, hey, working from home has created some issues with kids and childcare. So I don't know about you, but I wanted to laugh, especially after looking at all of the Families First Coronavirus Act and CARES Act and digging into all that information. So there's some memes that have been popping up that have made me laugh. Now, depending upon your style, I would never recommend this. At the same time, my kids are very quietly working in the other room. So, or maybe they're playing Fortnite. I don't really know, right? So just kind of what are those things that we can still connect with our staff so that they still feel involved, but also, you know, having some compassion and knowing, hey, there's other things going on at home. All of a sudden, you know, the separation of work life is no longer there. It's all one pot of soup, right? And that's where this comes in with what are the motivating needs, drives, and behaviors for each of our staff. Heidi, I love what you said, which is I can't seem to turn off at home. So how do you create some of those pauses during the workday? And there's some different things to do with that. So, you know, for me, my schedule has changed a little bit during the workday, and I would recommend that you're having those same conversations with your staff as well, is what are those motivating needs and desires that they have so that they can turn off, because that's something incredibly important. And it may be, hey, that they're working from 6 until 9 a.m. and then they're getting kids on, you know, homeschooling things and on the electronic learning. And then they are, you know, taking that break at lunch, so that there's some clear items and that those are also built into your calendar so that there's some transparency in communication. So one of the next questions that we have is communication. So this is the next key. So our first key was individualization. The second key is communication. Okay, and Crystal, you have a great question, and I'm going to come back to that. And if you could put that actually in the Q&A box, that would be incredibly helpful. And I just want to pause here for a second to name the difference between the Q&A box. With the chat box, unfortunately, I don't get those messages after the webinar is over to respond to you individually to give you some additional information. In the Q&A, I do. So if you would like, you know, a response afterwards from me, please put that in the Q&A. Really appreciate that. Okay, thank you. So moving back on, so do you know how to communicate with each staff member to increase productivity? And this communication is going to be different based on who those staff members are and what their personal needs are. So hopefully you've taken that assessment. I'm going to touch on that in just a minute. But the communication style here is a big one. We want to ensure that staff still feel that they have the resources, information, and relationships to do their job well. So question for you, and you can put this in the chat box, is how are you ensuring that your staff have the resources, information, and relationships to do their job well virtually? Love to hear your thoughts. And Emily, if you want to post that second poll question of do you have an individualized plan, that would be fabulous. All right, so Crystal's saying that they are asking them what they need and finding those resources. And so that could be some online resources, that could be stand-up meetings. One of the communication things that we've implemented that's incredibly, incredibly helpful is essentially it's a Zoom stand-up meeting every morning. So we're all jumping as a team on a Zoom call in the morning, and we're each taking 2 or 3 minutes to name, you know, what's going on for each of us. That there's no work allowed in this conversation, okay? And guess what? Everybody's video is on so that you can see their faces. That way, that allows you to really connect with your staff on that personal level. And, you know, one of the comments we had earlier, I think it was from Barbara, had stated, hey, you know, how do we still connect in those water cooler conversations? This is a great way to do that and connect during those kind of water cooler conversations. And so back to our poll question for a minute here is, do you have that individualized plan to engage your direct reports virtually based on their needs? And So we will keep going with these. And if you want to share those results, that would be fantastic, Emily.
Have those popped up on your screen?
Nope.
All right.
Oh, I'll let you do that and I'll answer this. So Scott just chimed in and said, hey, he has 62 people in his department. How does he connect with all of them at once? I love that question, Scott. So the question I would have is knowing, hey, you have 62 people on your team. Do you have smaller work teams that your staff typically work in? So, you know, when you're working inside the office, how do you typically break that down? Are they all directly reporting to you, or do you have some leads and some supervisors that you can kind of narrow that down into groups of maybe 6 or 8 that can get together on some of, you know, every morning for a couple minutes? Because what that's going to do is it's going to help to create those relationships. Another thing you could do, Scott, is start to kind of switch those individuals around so that they're connecting with other individuals, you know, as you go through, so it's not always the same. That way they feel connected to the entire team. So I see that you have niche groups. And the largest is about 25. So, you know, that group may be okay, or that may still be a little big, but, you know, just try a couple different things to see how that works for you and your team. So what we're seeing is about 18% of individuals stated that they do have that individualized plan, whereas 82% of you do not. So, you know, just something to kind of keep in mind, and we'll continue to talk about, hey, how do we create that individualized plan? And part of it is knowing, what do my staff need and how I specifically communicate with them and what they need. So that stand-up meeting gives you some great resources, because you're asking, saying, hey, what's going on that you need, and what do we need? So Laura asked, I believe it was Laura, are your daily meetings mandatory? So yes, we do have those meetings be mandatory because it's how we can check in. Now, one of the things that I would name with the mandatory meetings is just ensure that they are at a time when everyone can jump on. So for example, if a large part of your workforce has children that are now learning from home and school starts at 9 a.m. So for me, my kids start school at 9 a.m. Having a 9 a.m. meeting may not be the best thing that works with your staff. So, you know, do some checking to find out what that looks like. Are you working with a couple different schedules now to accommodate for individuals to really work from home and, you know, be very specific in what they're doing? And we did talk last week, and if you have questions on this, you know, let me know. But, you know, what does that virtual workforce look like? How do we make those accommodations and still be compliant with the Family First Coronavirus Act and the specific emergency FMLA with that? All right, so let's move on to some other questions with this. So socialization, I've really been talking about the socialization piece with those stand-up meetings. I've seen a lot of work groups have happy hours at around 5:30 at night, where, hey, you know what, our work team's just gonna get together kind of like we were grabbing a drink after work or just catching up after work. So that's something that you can do for socialization. Another thing that I'm seeing a lot of organizations do is they will just have an open Zoom room up over the lunch hour. So from noon to 1, it's kind of like a virtual lunchroom, right? Where individuals can come in and really start to ask some of those questions, have some of that connection that they didn't have otherwise. And so providing some of those different opportunities for individuals connect is important. The other thing is sometimes people need permission, right? So, hey, let's connect, and you don't have to join if we're doing a Zoom lunch, so to say, but it's definitely a way for individuals to feel like, hey, I typically have lunch at noon. I live on my routine. This is a way that I can keep up with that socialization and have that personal check-in. Here's another one, is depending upon the behavioral needs, and I'm going to get to this in just a minute, of each employee, an individualized plan will increase that productivity. And we're going to circle back around to that. And then the last one that we have for communication is that transparency in the communication. So there's a lot of fear out there right now with coronavirus. There's fear around, am I going to lose my job? There's fear around, hey, what's going to happen if, me or someone in my family, gets coronavirus? What does that look like? What does the financials of this look like? So when we can be as transparent as possible with our teams, what we're doing is we're building that trust. The more trust we build with our teams, the more we are able to ensure that their mind is at ease so that they can truly be productive in the work that they're doing. We also want to ensure that our staff feel included and safe to perform at their best. Working from home, especially for groups that don't have a family at home or don't have kids at home, can be incredibly, incredibly isolating, especially for those that have very high, extroversion, or those that are very much outgoing individuals that are used to being around groups of people. This is really hard, right? So for those of you that have taken that assessment, if you haven't, you still have the opportunity to do it and you'll get those results back right away. I want to go through and just kind of explain what these different behavioral drives look like. And you're going to see this on your sheet. And the further to the right a drive is, it's called high. The further to the left a drive is, it's called low. So if I say that, I don't want you to think, oh, it's high and low, up and down. It's actually left to right. So there's a couple things here. And what that assessment is really measuring is it is measuring your leadership style, which is here, it's called dominance. It is measuring the way that you communicate, which here it's called extroversion. It is measuring the work environment that really lights you up, that has you be incredibly successful. Here it's called patience. And then it is measuring, the details and how many decision points you need to make a decision. Here that's called formality. So what's important with this is, hey, what does this look like for my team and those needs that I specifically have? If I can understand my needs and the needs of the individuals on my team, man, I can create that plan to really help them. So if you have that in front of you, there's a couple of key items that I want to specifically kind of look at. So if you have team members that are a high A, or you yourself are high A, that means, hey, you are a big picture person. You are incredibly strategic. So if your A is on the right-hand side, if you'd want to just raise your hand or put yes in the chat box, that way, one, I'm keeping you engaged throughout, right? So one of the things I want you to learn from the webinar today is, how am I keeping you engaged virtually in the training that we're doing? Also, keeping you following along with what we're doing so that you can take that insight that you're getting today and put it into action to make some amazing things happen in your work. And so I only saw 2 responses there. So I'm going to name that to say, hey, if you're a high A, yes. If you're not, you can say no. So if you are that high A, meaning that drive is to the right, just kind of listen here for a second. It means that you have that your big picture thinker, you're very strategic. So a great kind of task for our high A's virtually in this environment is to give them an assignment to consider options for making up, lost ground. What are those things that we're specifically, not doing right now because we can't interact? I know we have a lot of nonprofits on the call. Fundraising is a huge issue for nonprofits. It's where you bring in the majority of your revenue. I know we have a number of churches on the call. The donations, on Sundays are how you bring in a lot of your revenue. So just kind of keep that in mind, is for those individuals that are very strategic, they like control, giving them projects where they can work on those things and feel of value is going to be incredibly important. I'm seeing that, hey, we have quite a few low A's. For those individuals that are low A's, and how we are managing those low A's is, we want to know that, hey, everything's going to work out. You know what? We're all in this thing together. All the companies are in this thing. This will all work out. So reassurance is something that is incredibly important to provide to those individuals that are the lower A's. The other thing with that is, this is a great opportunity. We talked about, communication with stand-up meetings in the morning. Picking up the phone and just saying, hey, how are things going? You know what? You're doing a great job on this project, or this is specifically what we need. So that's another thing to kind of let them know for those A's. For B's, this is our social individuals. These are high Bs. They are very social. There are extroverts. So for our high Bs, having their manager call them a couple of times a day, making sure that they don't feel like they're in isolation is something that's really important. Hopping on a couple Zoom calls throughout the day so that they feel, hey, I still have these timelines that I can continue to keep up with. Doing some ways to encourage them to be social, whether that is, social media, whether that's LinkedIn, doing things that they're still connecting with their clients, they're still connecting with staff or those individuals that they're serving, is going to help those individuals tremendously. So let's move on to C's for a moment. So those individuals that have those specific high C's, who are my high C's? I'm looking at my chat box, waiting for my high C's to come in. These individuals are very, very steady and they love familiarity. Do we feel like we are in a familiar environment right now? I would say probably not, right? So change is really hard for our high Cs. And so we need to make sure that we are providing them with some stability. So some of the great things that you can do to manage your high Cs and to lead them is give them a great list to follow. Here's what we need you to do. For our high Cs, if we give them a list to follow, guess what? That is not going to sound like micromanagement. That's going to sound like clarity. Clarity to high C's is gold. Now, I'm a very low C. So, giving me a list of things that I need to do is going to sound like micromanagement to me, and that's probably not going to be the best way to manage me. So, understanding kind of what your individuals need, you can create that individualized plan so that, hey, now I know I can adapt to change a little bit. I know that I can ensure that we're making the best out of this environment that we were kind of forced into. Not kind of, we were forced into. So something to keep in mind there. Scott, I love your answer back. You said, I'm a high C. I'm also a CPA. CPAs are typically high Cs, right? So thank you for that. Another one with high C's is they are amazing planners. How many of you CPAs out there or individuals and nonprofits that have planned out your whole year? That has all kind of gone out in a basket right now and is floating down the river somewhere, because guess what? Our tax deadline has moved, correct? Many of our fundraising events have changed. So let's give those high C's some planning activities to make up the lost ground of how can we get there? Can they be doing some outreach with clients or customers to ensure that, hey, they're still staying connected, but so that they feel like they have some kind of control over what's going on specifically in that environment. So another thing is, hey, maybe those high Cs can plan some lunch and learns, plan some webinars, etc. Now, when Emily and I put these webinars together, I'm a low C and I'm a low D, so I can change things in a flash like that. So for those of you that are high Cs or high Ds, when you got my email this morning, a couple hours before the webinar to do an assessment, you may have been like, wait, what? What? This isn't what I had planned for, right? So those are some differences to think about. So when you know kind of the behaviors of your staff, you can create that individualized plan for them and know best how to communicate. The last one we're going to touch on briefly is our high Ds, and this is how many decision points does it take to make a decision and how detailed is an individual. So it's kind of that risk mitigation and also the thoroughness. So high Ds can work on projects that reduce cost or inventory. So I know we have several individuals in the restaurant industry. What can they do right now to reduce inventory so that that food doesn't all go bad, right? Also, holding Zoom calls to discuss ways to reduce costs and mitigate risks. So I think we're all doing that in one way or another. So those are some specific ideas in those areas. So let's go to, Emily, can you put up our next poll question? And I know we asked this earlier, but I still want to hear the answer. So do you offer virtual meetings daily to replace the water cool chat? And so as we move on to kind of this next question, do you do those virtual meetings daily? And if you hadn't before, once that's answered, will you going forward, now that you have some of the keys to how do we engage individuals virtually, now that we're in the environment that we're in. And why Emily is looking at that before she shows that, we did get a question, and that is that the question was, are the daily meetings about the needs to accomplish their tasks for the day? So what I would say, and I believe it's Debrasha is the name, I apologize if I didn't say that correctly, but what I would say about that, Debrasha, is that there are two different needs, right? So one is a social need, and then one is going to be a task need to complete the specific tasks that are assigned to that individual. And so those kind of stand-up meetings that we do in the morning, those we take a couple minutes with each person depending upon how many are there, and we do just personal, how are things going? You know, we've got, you know, kids at home or whatnot. For me, my husband's a respiratory therapist, so he is in dealing with the front lines of what's going on with us. So what are those questions that we can ask those individuals to know, hey, what specifically do they need? So then you kind of know where their head's at, right? So we start with the personal, and then we flip into what are we working on? What do you need? Kind of a thing. So it is an and both, but there's definitely two separate pieces to that. So I hope that answers your question. All right, Emily, do you want to post that, the response from that poll? All right, and I did get a couple other kind of questions that came through here. So Barbara says we don't do stand-up meetings because schedules are too different, but we've been using Slack and it's great. Slack is a fantastic way to connect. One of the things that I would, you know, look at with Slack, if you have a number of high A's and especially high B's, that personal connection of seeing their face, I know right now I can't see any of your faces, but you can all see mine. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind, is what that specifically looks like. So Slack is a great one. Several spontaneous meetings with whoever is there on Slack's also great. It's kind of like, you know, stopping by somebody's cube or stopping by someone's office. So that's a great one to take a look at as well. All right, so I'm gonna keep moving on. I don't see that poll come up.
Sorry about that. It must be something with my Wi-Fi. It's posted, and it looks like, do you offer virtual meetings daily to replace the water cooler chat? 30% of you said yes, and 70% of you said no.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. And so with that, so, you know, of those that don't, hey, it's whatever works best for your organization, but we're finding, especially in this environment, that it's a way to really connect and to keep the pulse on how people are doing. And what they specifically need. So let's move to our next one, and that is, do you know each person's individual strengths and how they align with the team work styles? Well, now you know your own strengths, right? And so when we look at team work styles, it's understanding what the team as a whole needs to stay productive in times of uncertainty, and that's going to be key for them to really thrive in that environment. The next thing is, hey, what technology can you use to support the team as a whole? So Slack's been mentioned a couple times. Zoom, we're all on Zoom right now, so that's a really great one to take a look at and utilize. Those stand-up meetings that we talked about, some chat systems, and then project management software. So we're going to talk about accountability as one of our keys in just a minute. But that project management software, things like Asana or Trello or Basecamp, let me know what other ones you are you know, using or hearing, you know, so those are all kind of things to say, hey, where are we at with these specific projects, and what are the completion dates? What is the by when for when these specifically need to get done? And one of the key things here is, hey, we need to recognize the great work as a team. So some individuals want to be praised publicly. Our high Bs, they want to be praised publicly, right? Our extroverts. Those introverted individuals really don't want to be praised publicly. And what they love is they love just the walk by and say, hey, Barb, you did a really great job on this specific project, and I appreciate that you got into detail and the way that you thanked the client and were able to ask some follow-up questions to really understand what their needs were. So understanding how people tick allows you to individualize that plan and tie that into the team so that your team members can support each other. The other thing that I would name with team work styles here is ensuring with those teamwork styles that, hey, we understand what type of strategy we have. So are we exploring new areas? Are we producing? Are we in a stabilizing environment, meaning, hey, we're just trying to keep everything going right now, and that may be the case right now? Or are we cultivating and really building relationships? So those are some of those key things to really look at within that environment. And so I do have some questions that popped up that I'm going to answer before we go on to our next one. And that is, Barbara said that project management software, she recommends Trello and Monday.com. So, those are all great ones. So whatever that project management tool that you're using that allows individuals to kind of know where others are at. One of the things I love about the project management tools is the transparency in it. We know where things are at. We know where projects are at. We can all see the work that's been done and really collaborate as a team on that, and know, hey, when do we need to jump into a call, etc. Jake or Jack 358, what is a stand-up meeting? That's such a great question. So a stand-up meeting is essentially, where you're bringing your team together. So what we've been doing is we bring our team together every morning on a Zoom call. All video cameras are on, so you can really see what's going on. Sometimes we have kiddos sitting on, parents' laps, etc. But what that does is that allows us to still have that social connection, and then we're moving into, hey, what are the work tasks that we need to work on? What questions do you have? Ensuring that individuals still feel comfortable to pick up the phone and call, another coworker, or email or Skype or whatever that is, so that they can still connect. So I hope that that answers your question. And let's see, Asana. Asana is another great one, Bob. And they have fabulous online tutorials. Yeah, there's a lot of great tools there with Asana, Trello, Basecamp, Monday, a lot of them. So pick which one you love and run with it, right? All right, so the next one that we have for our fourth key is employee engagement. So how do you keep employees engaged virtually in a time of uncertainty? And so one of the keys to keeping employees engaged virtually is, asking them questions. What is it that you specifically need? So with that, if you want to launch our next poll, Emily, it's how do you keep employees engaged virtually? Awesome, thank you. And so we've got a couple questions here. Transparent communication. So this could be email, Slack, Trello, chat. It could be daily Zoom calls, or if there's another way that you do keep employees engaged, if you want to put that in the chat function, that would be fantastic. And so, sometimes using pulse surveys, just quick 2-3 question surveys. Hey, do you, would you recommend your workplace to a friend? Do you feel productive at home right now working? Do you feel, some of those kind of pulse questions can really ensure that, hey, those individuals are engaged. So what we have here is about 91% are, keeping staff engaged with those transparent communication, email, Slack, Trello. We've got 9% that are doing kind of those daily calls, and I believe that we have some down here. Let's see. I know we did get some back in potentially for. Nope, I don't see any others that came in through our chat box. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that connection with our staff, that our staff truly feel connected to us as those supervisors and as coworkers, and then that we are enhancing what they have and what they need. So what is that experience that they're currently having, and how can we enhance that? So knowing what they specifically need, we can do that by the way that we are providing some direction as well, enabling them to maybe work on different tasks than they have before. So you know what, we are in a different environment, therefore that job that they had in the office every day may not be the same job that they have now. So if we can provide them some different things that really utilize their core skill set and allow them to stretch a little bit, that can keep them incredibly engaged in a way that they may not have been before if they were bored. So those are some different ways to engage. And so let's go into a couple kind of key items here that we want to look at. We want to monitor job satisfaction, because what we know is that when individuals start to kind of check out or become disengaged, their job performance also starts to go lower and lower. So kind of monitoring both the job performance, but also monitoring, hey, are they still asking questions? Are they getting what they need? Are they reaching out the same way that they've done before? Or has this individual all of a sudden gone radio silent when they've never been radio silent before, right? So kind of reaching out in a way that works for them. So that's where some of that assessment becomes really important. So are, extroverts reaching out with a phone call a couple times a day to provide that space and give them that permission? Whereas, our low Bs, we like to think about things first. So sending that information via email and saying, hey, what else do you need now that you have some of that clarity? Barbara, I love this. You've done Google Docs surveys and they've worked very well. Individualize them so that they're confidential. Absolutely. And that confidentiality is really important too. A tool that I use quite frequently is Typeform. So I use Typeform for all my clients. I do climate surveys on Typeform, exit interviews on Typeform, so that can also be done confidentially. So there's some great tools out there to take a look at. All right. Continue project teams remotely, utilizing each employee's strength and connectedness with the team as a whole. So those teams you had kind of working, or the niche groups I know that Scott had talked about earlier, ensuring that those keep going could be incredibly helpful. You want to gain input from team members. So just as if you're in a meeting, there's times where you notice that somebody isn't necessarily talking, ensuring that you're getting their input, because they may have some great insights, but if you don't call on them the same as you would in a regular meeting, you're going to miss that insight that that individual has. You want to ensure that you're building trust with the team, especially if you have new team members or the team has changed as you've gone into this virtual environment. What does that look like? Boost morale. So we talked about, some stand-up meetings. We talked about potentially happy hours after work. We talked about, doing some sort of contest of, hey, what does your home office look like? Or, hey, who has the most people in one room working, around the kitchen table? Whatever that is that starts to boost morale, but also brings some interaction. Remember, yes, it's called social distancing, but I think it's more physical distancing, because we still want to ensure that we are connected and supporting each other. So frequent and transparent communication and being consistent with the company and the team values, and then keeping going, right? So what we know right now is that the world is sick and the world is going to get better. So as the world gets better, we need to ensure that we're engaged so that we can bounce back from this, not only, as a company, but also personally, and in the way that we're doing our specific work. So the last key that we have is accountability. So with that accountability piece, what we want to do is really look at, hey, how does your staff know what is expected of them? So that's a key question that I have, and I believe that's a poll question, Emily. Awesome, thank you so much. So do you believe that your staff knows what is expected of them during this specific time of working from home? We'll give you a couple minutes there. And I did get a question come in from Barbara saying, can you say more about building trust? And so what I would say about building trust, Barbara, is when you can create situations for individuals to collaborate together, give feedback, and really learn and grow in the specific work that they're doing, that definitely builds trust. So when individuals feel heard, they feel valued, that's definitely going to build trust within that group. So I hope that that helps. And if anyone else has any ideas about, hey, how are you building trust in your workplace, put those in the chat box. Again, because it's all about the collaboration. I'm definitely not the smartest one here in our chat room today. So if you have, how are you building trust, go ahead and put that in the chat box. All right, so our poll has come back, and the question was, do you believe that your staff knows what's expected of them when they're working from home? And 90% of you said yes, which is fantastic. So my question would be, how do you know, right? And so that's a key piece to, that is a key piece to this. All right, and I don't have anything in the chat box yet on building trust. So if you have that, go ahead and throw that in the chat box. And we'll keep moving on with the accountability piece. So what is accountability? Accountability is essentially broken down into three things, really simple. How much, of what, and by when. So when you're holding staff accountable during this specific time, and 90% of you said, yep, they know exactly what's expected of them. So they know how much they need to produce. They know what they need to produce and what by when. When is that thing due? So these are great things to put into your project management tools like your Trello, like your Asana, etc. You also want to ensure that that's really clear to them. At the end of, the pandemic that we're going through, you may have some hard choices to make of who to bring back from a layoff, who potentially to lay off. We know that from an HR perspective and from a legal perspective, these could be rife with, some legal actions and some lawsuits. Remember that the burden of proof is always on the employer to show why you did what you did. And so having some policies in place, having those procedures of, yep, my staff knew exactly what they needed to do when, because they knew how much, of what, and by when. And that was shown through whatever tool you're using will be very helpful. And then have you aligned the expectations to the new normal? So, the expectation may have been in the past that you worked from, 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. Well, that may not be the way that things are working right now. So it may be that individuals have, can't work from 8 to 5, but yet you're allowing some flexibility in the telework so that they can work from 6 to 8:30. They can work again from 9:30 until noon, and again from 1 to 4, and maybe at night or whatever that is. But however they're working, I'm going to, point out some, compliance items is under the Fair Labor Standards Act, we still have to pay our hourly employees for all of the hours they're working. So we need to make sure you have a great timekeeping system in place and that you're paying them for all of those hours, because that doesn't go out the window just because we're in a different environment. And so knowing, hey, what's the accountability, not only for hours, but for the output and the outcome of the projects that they're working for, and that those are aligned. The next thing, and I love this one, and this is weekly, hour one and hour done. And this may be a new concept to some of you, but this is one that I've used with my team and I've used personally for several years now. And it's essentially at the beginning of every week, I lay out all of the things that I need to do. And I actually put that in my calendar. So I don't have this 10-page to-do list, because everything that's needed is in my calendar so that I have my time allocated for that. And so that's how I ensure I'm staying on top of what those things are. The other thing that helps with accountability is, let's say that, Scott, you call me and say, hey, Tracy, when are you going to get this report done? Instead of just hearing me say, hey, Scott, it's on my list, I can say, actually, Scott, that is on my calendar to do Wednesday from 2 to 4 p.m. Does that still work for you? What that lets you know, Scott, is that, yep, I've got it. It's scheduled. This is when it will be done. And it could be, hey, Tracy, this deadline got moved up. I really need you to move that into today. Is there a way you can do that? So you're still having fluid conversations, but we're being really clear about what those expectations are and what that individual needs from their own work skills to be successful. So one of the things that we know is for the normal person, it takes 26 minutes to get back to work once they're interrupted, right? And we're at home right now with tons and tons of distractions. So the more we can build in that accountability and that flexibility with them to allow them to do and both, but holding them specifically to here's the outcomes that we're looking for, you're going to be able to move that much further. And the hour done, so this final one, and I don't know who said it at the beginning of the call, but it was, how do we ensure that we're not working all the time? How do we, have those stop times so we're not always on because we're at home? The hour done, I typically do the last hour on a Friday afternoon, right? So I'm reviewing everything that I did over the work week. So I know that I can go into my weekend or into my evening. You can do it at night as well, knowing, hey, this is what I accomplished. Yep, there was some things that maybe went really well, or there was some things that didn't go so well that I know that I need to build into next week. That way you can create that separation somewhat, not always, of work and home so that you kind of have some of those. So we have a couple of questions here. So Scott said he has a management meeting in Skype and people don't want to turn on their video. The last meeting had 12 senior executives and only himself and one others would put their video on. So should I insist? I love this question. So what I would probably do, Scott, is I would ask them one-on-one, help me understand. Is it that they're afraid that, hey, there is, a kid in the room, or they don't want you to see their messy house? I'll name right now, I have taken over my son's bedroom. So, whatever that is. So figure out what that fear is and to work through it. Now, can you insist? Absolutely. But I would always question, what are the unintended consequences of insisting on something, and what is that outcome that you're really looking to get? So I don't have a hard and fast answer for you there. So as we kind of wrap up today, I have some kind of key action items for you to take. One is, if you haven't scheduled daily huddles, try it. See what that looks like for the socialization. Also see what that specifically looks like for, just that touch point on how are individuals doing. We know, and we're hearing and seeing news stories about depression and domestic violence and some of those other things creeping in as individuals are working from home. So it gives us a good touch point to connect with our staff. The next item that I have for you is to complete a behavioral assessment on 2 staff members, or have them complete it. So that is something that I am offering. If you loved what you saw for you, that is an offer, is have one of your highest performers and a performer that's struggling really take a behavioral assessment, and then we can jump on a call and talk about that. So if that's something you're interested in, just in the Q&A, not the chat, in the Q&A, just put interested in a BA, and I'll send you an email so that we can take care of that for you and give you some insights for your team so that you can really look at those 5 keys to transition to the virtual workforce. And then this last one is to individualize your management based on those employee needs. So what is it that they really need? That BA will give you some insight into that. Some of this you can just kind of figure out, right, by asking those questions. So we have our 5 keys to transition to the virtual workforce is, individualize for each of those employees. What specifically do they need? How is your communication with staff? How do they need to be communicated with? Remember the golden rule versus the platinum rule. The platinum rule is we want to treat others the way they want to be treated versus the way we want to be treated or managed. Team dynamics. How is the team connecting and working together, knowing that we are, physically distancing, but we still need to stay engaged socially together as well? What does that engagement look like? I love the, Barb, you talked again about, regular anonymous surveys. What are those kind of items there. And then the last one is accountability, ways that we can ensure that our staff know exactly what they need to do by when and how much. So if you have additional questions, please go ahead and throw those in the chat box or in the Q&A. Again, the Q&A, I will respond to those emails. The chat box, I will not. So thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to working with you again. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And yes, again, thank you all for joining us. This is a really timely topic, and we're going to try to offer as many resources as we can. One more time, if you were interested in that BA, just the Q&A down there, just say interested, and we'll make sure to reach out to you. Tracy's information is also listed on the screen right now. One more time, you will receive the link of today's recording along with the presentation so you can review it again. If you do have any other questions, please don't ever hesitate to reach out to us. So thank you all again, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.